Okay. Um, should we get started with introductions and all that?
Yep.
Yes, please. And first of all, I see here an eight participant with the number. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, sorry. That's my grandparents. They're just watching the round. They are gonna stay muted and all that.
Okay, perfect. Are they helping you?
No, they're not helping.
Okay, perfect. Welcome. Okay, guys, let's start, as you mentioned, Sam, with introductions and let's this
Hi,
move
everyone.
forward.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. I will be the first government speaker from Dalton. And he, him pronouns, please.
Yeah, I'm Austin Gordon. I will be the second speaker for Gov, and I use he, him pronouns as well. Verbal POIs are best for us.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Yolanda, I actually have you judging in a different room now. I had to switch out the pairing, so
Oh, okay. Where would you like me to go?
you're in sorry, let me make sure I get the right room. It's Varsity room 1.
Sure, no problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's continue, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Andrew. I'll be the leader of the opposition, so speaking first.
I'm Alexander, he, him pronouns.
Oh, yeah.
Second speaker on opposition.
Thank you very much.
Judges, are you ready?
You want us to introduce ourselves? I'm Yvette Monveliski from the Blind Brook debate team.
I'm
I
Ariel
think we're
Zaytuna.
missing a judge. Are we missing a judge, or Ariel, are you the
No, I'm
third
a
judge?
judge.
Who's
We have 3 here.
It's Ariel here, and myself and you.
Oh, wait, who's the third judge?
Me.
Ariel Segura.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
We have 2 Ariels here. So my name is Ariel Zaytuna. I'm from Blind Brook School 2.
And my name is Ariel Segura, and I am a debater at Tech.
Awesome.
Okay, guys.
Judges, are you all ready? Awesome. Opponents, are you ready? Awesome. My time begins now. I'm going to begin at the top of case and talk a little bit about what exactly this motion means. What does it mean to vote Gov in this round? What does it mean to vote up? And then I'm going to give 2 contentions from side government. First, on why this is going to be best for you, and secondly, on why this is going to be best for your field. Beginning at the top of case here, we think that this round should generally be judged on egoism. This house is this person, and we think that we should do what, like, whoever wins this round should be whoever argues that this would be best for the individual in question. What will be best, like, most in their self-interest to do? Is it to popularize this field, or is it to try to create new innovations within it? We also think generally this round is about academics with stable employment in the field. Those are the people who have time for research. Those are the people who have specialized knowledge in somewhat obscure academic fields. And those are the people who have the sort of choice to choose between like publishing like very like accessible material about this field or trying to innovate. Notably, this round is about the trade-off between innovation and making the field more accessible. If you can do both, then that's not part of the round. On side government, you don't personally innovate in the field, but you do make the field itself less obscure. But on side up, you are in an obscure field, and if you develop new concepts, the motion says in the motion that they are still going to be esoteric. These new developments will still be largely unheard of and unknown by almost everyone. This means on side up, you innovate, yes, but you aren't becoming like Einstein or Tesla or Newton, someone who's like widely famous because of stuff they came up with. You're choosing between having these ideas be widely known and choosing to have your innovations exist but not be widely known at all. That's how this motion works because it's about the trade-off. Now, also, On side government, we think this is notably that work popularizing this thing doesn't necessarily need to just be books. It includes books, but it also includes like social media and YouTube and lots of different methods available in today's age for trying to make this currently obscure academic field more accessible to a general lay audience. Now, moving to the first contention from side government on why this is going to be best for you personally. Notably, most obscure fields don't have anything written about them for the general public. Take like quantum physics 50 years ago, when it's this extremely fringe, radical, obscure new theory. There was nobody trying to explain it to everyday people. What this means is that the chance that your book or podcast or YouTube channel or whatever is the first or one of the first in the field to explain this idea to a lay public is really, really high. Because you are one of the first people breaking ground on whatever your field is, the chance that lots of good things then happen, that you personally, like that you get a lot of success from this, is also quite high. There's three things that will happen when you do this. This is all under this first contention. The first thing that will happen to you is you'll get more renown. More people will know you because more people will end up reading your thing. More people will try to digest this thing. And notably, because you're an academic, you're going to have a lot of friends. You're going to have a lot of people around who are in academic circles who are going to read this thing and be like, oh, that's really cool. I understand it. Whereas if you had done something that was really dense and not understandable to someone who isn't in the field, your friends in academia, the people you actually know, and they're not going to be able to understand your stuff. And this means when you have more renown, you get invited to more things. You make a lot more new friends. You have a lot more potential friends in academia because you get invited to book talks. You get invited to do all these different things when you have something that's accessible to people who aren't the 5 people who work on this specific brand, the specific species of beetle. Now, the second thing that'll happen is you'll get more money. Notably, the lay public often wants to learn about specialized academic fields. I think there's a misconception that the most of the lay public don't really care about this stuff and aren't interested. But I don't think this is actually the case. I think that lots of times fields make themselves overly dense and impossible for someone who isn't in them to understand. But when people try to make them accessible, those people often have a lot of success and a lot of popularity. See the success of the YouTube math channel 3 Blue 1 Brown, which goes into dense abstract mathematical concepts but explains them with graphics that are easy to understand and easy for anybody, even people who haven't studied all this stuff, to digest. Look at the success of Oversimplified, a YouTube channel which does animations about history and tells goes over huge amounts of history. Once again, massively successful. Look at Brian Kaplan, an economist who writes graphic novels about economics. Once again, massively successful. The point is, it's not that the lay public doesn't want to learn, it's that often they're not provided the means to be able to. But when you do this, they'll want to buy your stuff. They'll want to buy whatever product you're selling, and you'll get a lot more money. Sure, you do have a stable job, but it's still going to make your life comparatively better, especially as an academic where you're probably not making the big bucks. To make more money, it's going to make your life a lot better. Thirdly, here is on fulfillment. We think that this is all, once again, third point, subpoint under this first contention. We think that most people working in obscure fields, there's a kind of isolation because nobody else works on it. It's not that you won't have friends in your life or anything like that, but there's a kind of isolation of passion that you really care about this thing. Why else would you go into this obscure field? But probably most of the people you bump into or in academic circles, or just maybe there's not that many people at your college or whatever working in that same field. There's not a lot of people around you who have the same passion. But when you try to make it more accessible to people, then when you try to make it more accessible to people, you get to watch other people get excited about the thing you love. When you're teaching, when you're trying to get people interested, you get to watch other people go through the same process you did of falling in love with this specialized subject. Comparatively, in an op world, innovation is really hard and involves lots of failure, and you're not bringing anybody else into the field to and getting that excitement. On side op, you're burning the midnight oil by yourself, trying to get this thing to work in a laboratory or whatever, and trying to make this innovation happen. But the truth is that innovation fails constantly. There's no positive reinforcement cycle, and it's a really, really lonely process. The second contention from side gov is on this being best for your field. We think that there's a ton of smart people in the world and a ton of smart kids in particular. But the question of what fields get development, and probably you want your field to have more in it, like you probably want your field to like have more people in it because it'll be good for the field. So the question is, what field do all these smart kids go into? If you popularize a given field, make sure that like anyone who might be interested can pick it up and go, whoa, this field is so cool. Then they join and then these kids and adults will want to go into that field. I'll just finish this and then I'll end in grace, which is that like fundamentally, all these kids and adults are choosing what field they want to go into. And if they can't ever digest it without having a degree, then they're never going to go into your field. If you want people to go into your field and have developments, then you have to make sure that people who aren't already in it can be like have it be accessible and get excited by it. Thus, I urge a government ballot.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, just get my second. Yeah. No, just do the second. Sorry. Okay. I will start my time now. All right. So first, as far as the framework, we agree with egoism. We just need to think for a little bit about what this actor actually cares about. Obviously, egoism means self-interest. We think the actor probably also cares tremendously about contribution to the field. I mean, like Sam said, most of these guys are not making a ridiculous amount of money. They're probably really, really smart too. So they're going into this field because it's something that they actually care about. And that means that they want to see the field expand. They want to see new contributions, new research in the field. So obviously, I think that under egoism or benefit to the actor, we should care about one, self-interest, and two, contribution to the field. Now, on Gov's characterization, yeah, academics do have stable employment, but their income comes from research stipends and university employment. And as soon as they stop researching, they stop making money, or at the very least, they're making much less money because their job hinges upon the research that they're doing. And yeah, this round is a trade-off, but it's not an absolute trade-off. If you are the scientist on op, you can focus on research, but that doesn't mean you have to like live in your ivory tower and not talk to anyone outside of your small academic circle and never use social media or communicate with non-academics. Like that's just totally unrealistic. You're going to have a life outside of your job. You're going to be talking to people outside of your job. And similarly, if you choose to focus on accessibility, you're still going to be like at least around people that are doing the job because they're your friends, like Sam says. Now, as far as new developments still being esoteric and this scientist not becoming like Newton or Einstein, you might not set out to do the work that you're doing with the guarantee that you're going to end up like Newton or Einstein or whomever, but that doesn't mean that your work is never going to become important, that your work is never going to become famous. I mean, if you look like, for example, at Carrico and Weissman, the two scientists that discovered the COVID mRNA vaccine, they for years and years produced research that was like somewhat important, but nobody really cared. And they weren't making that much money. But then all of a sudden they have this major breakthrough and their mRNA research, which was considered like fringe and far off at the time, all of a sudden becomes the single most important paper in the entire world. Now, we don't need to be all of a sudden stumbling upon the most important research in the entire world, but I don't think it's so unfair to say that if you're dedicating your life to research, at least some of that research might end up being useful. Now, onto our characterization. We think that this house wants to use their life to maximally contribute to the world and their field especially. But what we need to understand is that this house is just a single person. And they might be a specialist in their field, but other specialists exist too. So do tons of scientific authors or publicists or whomever else is trying to make the field more accessible. If this house decides to write a book or make a documentary, it will definitely be just one of many. And on top of that, it's probably not going to be able to compete with other books, movies, etc., that are being produced by larger studios. Studios like National Geographic or Colormatic, they're always going to be making more complete, more accessible films than individual academics. And maybe this house is going to get like interviewed or something for one of them, but they're not going to be the most important documentaries. They at most might dedicate a few hours to accessibility, but it doesn't make sense to do so for years of their lives. If this house really wants to contribute to the field, then the framework for this round should just be the actual contributions that they, or not framework, but like they should win the round based off making more contributions to the field rather than talking about it and not actually really helping it too much. Now, on to Gov's first contention. about most obscure fields not having anything written about them. I just don't think that's true. Nearly every obscure field has something out there written about them. Like your book or podcast is almost certainly not going to be the first in its field. And if it's not the first in its field, it probably won't be the best because listen to what the examples that Gov gives you. I mean, some of these guys are authors and yeah, they have backgrounds in economics, but also in writing. Or like this science channel on YouTube, the animations are amazing. If you're some guy who's dedicated your entire life to like in the forest research of some obscure frog, you're probably not going to be a great animator or like great at talking to people as well. And your skills are probably going to be better focused on the research that you've spent your entire life training to do rather than switching up careers to something that you're less talented at. But let's say that you actually are the first person. There are like 5 people researching a certain type of frog. I don't understand why anyone would want to buy your book outside of those 4 other academics. I mean, who wants to learn about these totally obscure frogs? The average person just doesn't really care that much. And even if you are the first person to release a book or podcast on this one specific frog, I can guarantee that there are a million others about different frog types from like the same genus. And why would people want to listen to your unbranded one about some frog they've never heard about when they could just turn on the National Geographic one that's basically about the same thing and they're going to trust it way more? So yeah, you do make more money if you're one of these few people that are massively successful with making science more accessible. But just like you can't guarantee that if you stick to research, you're going to be Newton or Einstein or someone else super famous, you also can't guarantee that if you dedicate your life to accessibility, you're going to become the most famous guy there either. More likely than not, you're probably going to be pretty obscure no matter what path you take. And then as far as fulfillment, you've already decided to dedicate your life to research. This is what truly excites you. As soon as you stop doing what truly excites you, you'll probably be less fulfilled. Not to mention that the only way you get fulfillment in Gov world is if you're actually reaching tons and tons of people and bringing them into the field and driving a ton of interest. But more likely than not, you're probably not going to be doing that. You'd probably rather spend your time in a lab doing what it is that you love. Now, on to their second contention about it being best for the field. I just don't think that's true either. Average people are not going to read this person's paper, and no random person is going to pick up a random book on quantum physics when the field is brand new. These people are probably going to read an enjoyable book, like some famous fiction or something, and the people who are actually reading the book are people interested in the field already. But if the book is eventually popular, it's going to be full of like old research and no new innovation. So these books are going to be read less and less since the academics in the field would rather read something new and more innovative. Now, on to our first contention on contribution to the field. There are 3 subpoints here. The first is on innovation. So historically, all these significant discoveries, they come from work that appeared obscure at the time. Like Einstein's theory of relativity, number theory, whatever it is, nobody really thought much of it when it was released. But by allowing this house to focus on developing new ideas, we can at least create the potential for transformative knowledge that could change how we understand the world and solve future problems. And now, second subpoint on inspiration. Most of the people that this house might reach with a book or documentary probably watch a little film and then forget about it. Maybe they're interested for one night while they're watching Netflix. But the vast majority of people are both unsuited to the field and don't care enough about it. And plus, why would this house's documentary make a difference when a bunch of them already exist? Instead, this house has the potential to really inspire future specialists with groundbreaking academic research. Anyone seriously considering becoming a rocket scientist probably already knows the basics and doesn't need an accessible documentary. But they might not know about like new propulsion mechanics, and that should excite them more than another book that resembles the 10 they've already read. So we think that actually accessibility is generally a product of interesting innovation. If you don't have something to talk about, there's no point in making it more accessible. And we think that the most important thing that's going to drive other people to want to make things more accessible who are suited to communications is you doing groundbreaking research. Now, on to our second contention, self-interest. Subpoint A is the stable income that exists only in op world. On both sides of the house, this house already has a stable employment and probably income too. With accessibility, you're never going to be able to compete with these larger scale journals or film studios, so you'll never be able to make that much money. But if you opt to abandon your employment to pursue accessibility, then you risk losing all of your income with very little upside. Subpoint B is the money from innovation. On the off chance that you do stumble upon something incredible, something that really changes your field, you're not only going to help society tremendously, but you're also going to make a ton of money from it. But even if you don't stumble upon anything that crazy, you're going to get the university stipends and at least have a better, more stable life. And then finally is on the legacy of innovation. If you do actually do something important, then finally your name is going to be known beyond these small academic circles that are probably, whether you're trying to make things more accessible or sticking to research, probably the only people that care about your obscure frog species anyway. And so at the point where you're not going to make that much of a difference in
Time is up. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, we'll fix the volume. Okay. Is everybody ready to begin? Okay, then my time will begin now. The first thing that I want to do in this speech is just note the fact that by and large, OP has shied away from the advocacy that they're assigned to have in the motion. They try and tell you all of these things in a way of trying to mischaracterize the round because they don't want to have to defend the fact that on their side, you become a person who puts a ton of time into something, doesn't have much of an fulfillment, doesn't have any of the impacts that we talk about, but on our side, you actually impact your field in a meaningful way. We're going to talk about this line by line starting at the top of case because they try and characterize this round in a way that's really, really, really unfair. Firstly, they try and tell you overall that like academics have stable employment, but only if they research. This is totally not true. Most academics make their money from publishing things that people actually buy. University stipends for research are only necessary because people that conduct research into esoteric fields don't make any money, and the research has to be the way that they're funded. People that publish books to broader audiences are always going to be making more money. Then they try and tell you that there's no possible way that your work is going to become famous because there's already going to be a ton of other things about it. This is obviously not the case. This is an obscure academic field. National Geographic makes things about animals. This idea that they're putting forth that like 15 other people will have already written something for the general public about your obscure academic field is obviously false. Look at the warranting that Sam gives you in our case about why this is true, that you're probably going to be the first. People that are in academic fields do write about the things in their field, but they write about those things for other people in the field and people that already have PhDs to read. The vast majority of people in obscure academic fields are not writing things that are meant for consumption by the general public. Even in the example that they give of mRNA vaccines, most people have no idea how mRNA vaccines work. They just know that they got a COVID vaccine, which means that the vast majority of the general public still hasn't interacted with that information. They're completely wrong about this. Then they try and tell you that it doesn't mean that your work won't ever become famous just because it's somewhat esoteric. This is also completely incorrect. It says explicitly in the motion that your work is going to continue to be esoteric no matter how much development you create if you vote for OP. That specifically means that the average person is never going to be able to understand it. And this is a perfect example of them trying to shy away from the advocacy that they're actually supposed to be defending here. Because it's not true that your work is like never going to become famous. It is actually never going to become famous if you vote for OP, and there probably aren't a lot of other things that have been published so far in the field. That's all of the key stuff on the top of case. Now onto their responses to GovCase. Most of these responses are based on their faulty characterization of the round, as is their case. Let's start with their first response on our first contention, where they told you that it's not actually going to get you any renown or money because nearly every obscure field already has something written about them. And while it's true that obscure fields have things written about them, as I just said, they have things written about them that are not for the general public. They're written for people with degrees and tons of experience, and you're very likely going to be the first person to try and communicate these things to the general public. Sam explains this, and they don't interact with it directly. Second, they try and tell you that if you're just some guy, you're not going to be able to make good animations or be a good communicator. This is not necessarily the case. First of all, you might be, but also you can learn to be a good communicator, especially if you're already an academic or a professor who teaches people for the majority of their living. And another example, like the YouTube channel examples that we gave, the guy 3 Blue 1 Brown, the math channel that Sam talked about, he has spoken openly on his YouTube channel about how he learned to become a good animator, about how he learned to become a good communicator by starting a YouTube channel. These are incredibly smart people. They're academics, and they can learn how to do these things. Then they try and tell you that like you're not going to make any money because nobody wants to learn about these things, and even if you're the only one, then nobody's going to care. This again totally ignores the warranting that we actually give you in our case about how the average person is actually really interested in learning about these kinds of obscure fields, but there isn't anything written or created for them that is actually meant for the general public to watch. There isn't any kind of National Geographic, and we think this is really important to see here that the average person is interested in these things. As their second response here, they try and say again that they're just going to be 10 other things that already exist, like films or National Geographic, but we've already clearly shown you that that isn't the case. People want to learn about these things, and you are going to be the only one who's actually trying to teach them. Then their third response here is that you've already dedicated yourself to research, and that's how you're going to get all of your fulfillment as a response to our point on fulfillment. We think that this isn't actually the case. You haven't dedicated your life to research, you've dedicated yourself to the field, and you want to bring more people into the field because that's incredibly fulfilling. And this, again, really doesn't respond to the actual logic that we give you in our case. People love to watch other people get excited about the things that they care about. That's why people that are really interested in things never shut up about them, because people really care about talking to other people. Even if you're very dedicated to the field, that doesn't mean you're only dedicated to research, and they fail to respond to the logic of this contention, where we show you that talking to other people brings you a lot of fulfillment. Now, on our second contention, they just repeat this idea that average people aren't going to read this, so that's not going to bring anybody into your field. This, again, is wrong. We're not talking about some random average person here. We're talking about the very smart people that are interested in learning and care about these things like this. We've talked about the incredibly smart people that are out there that are deciding what field to go into. And if you never make any content that's accessible for an average person, or like an average person in a different field of academia than you, then they're never going to come into the field. Even if like the average person isn't going to suddenly decide to jump into your obscure field of study, a large number of people probably will if you write it well. Then they say that people aren't going to care about it because people don't read books because they're boring. But as we explained, there's other fun ways that people can interact with your material through social media or through YouTube or through other videos. It's very clear that people are going to become interested in your field and they are going to join. Now onto responding to the opposition case. Their first point here is that you can like create innovation, but we think that having more people in the field is always going to be better for development than for you to just research yourself. Unless you're like the greatest, most smart person in your field ever, having 50 people all join the field that are going to focus on research is going to do a lot more for the field than just you researching. Second is on inspiration, where they try and tell you that, you can inspire people by making developments, but most people have never interacted with the field that you're involved in, which means that even if you make a development in that field, nobody's going to know about it, so there's going to be no way that they're ever going to be inspired by it. Then when they try and tell you that like that's the only way you're going to inspire people because they've already read like 10 books on the subject, this again is based on their faulty characterization of the fact that like 50 other people will have already written about this thing. That's not true. You inspire people by explaining to them how it works and bringing in their interest, not making developments. Then, secondly, onto self-interest. They first try and tell you that you're not going to be able to make any money and you'll have to abandon your employment when you vote for Gov. That's obviously not the case. People want to make more money and you're not going to be abandoning your employment either. Then they also say that like if you innovate and change your field a lot, you're going to make a ton of money, but that isn't true because your field is super obscure. If you make a great innovation and then publish a book about it and like 6 academics read it, you're not going to make any money. But if you write a book that's palatable to the general public and thousands of people read it, that's how you're actually going to make money. But then thirdly, on finally getting your name known, this is a clear turn to our side. We're going to show you that on our side, you're actually the one who gets your name known more throughout history. Why? Because you remember the people that popularize, not the people that innovate. Nobody knows who invented the car. Almost nobody knows his name. But everybody knows who Henry Ford is because he popularized the car and made it accessible for everybody in America to purchase. Moving into my grace time here, I want to make it unbelievably clear that the person who popularizes innovations and makes them something that the general public is able to consume, that is the person who's actually remembered in history, not the person who makes the innovation. Insofar as you are that person, you will be the one who gets your name known, not the person who actually did the research. And for all these reasons, we could not be prouder to urge a government ballot in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Alex, when you're ready.
One second, I'm setting my timer stop. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Okay. My time will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to be starting off top of case and then going gov case and then ending on op case. Starting off on top of case, they talk about how like op has give all of these like false characterizations, and this just isn't true. And they also talk about like how university stipends for research in esoteric fields don't make that much money. That's also not true. University stipends fund nearly all research at universities. And yes, if you run a YouTube channel with millions of subscribers, then you make more money than an academic researcher. But come on, 99.999% of YouTube channels have like 100 subscribers max and don't make any money. If we want to talk about unfair twists, how about the assumption that if you make podcasts about your weird math or obscure frogs, you are going to get millions of subscribers to sell millions of books? You are almost certainly not going to make it out of obscurity because nobody cares about your podcast. Even if the National Geographic is about animals and yours is about Mediterranean coral reefs, why wouldn't people just watch National Geographic? They don't tell you this. If anything, we think that GovSide is far more unfair in their characterization of the round. They then go on to say that your work will continue to be esoteric over time and it will never become famous if you vote for op. This also isn't true. Just because your work starts out esoteric does not mean it will end that way. Nobody knew about Carrico or Weissman for decades, but then they invented the COVID vaccine, and suddenly every single person knows about them, or most know about them, if I have time at the end. Also, one last thing on characterization. So these academic fields, even if they're not that popular, they already like have it's already possible to popularize these esoteric academic fields. There's already like journalists, educators, and science communicators who bridge the gap between experts and the public. And it's inefficient to ask someone who already knows a lot about this topic to focus on accessibility when this house is uniquely qualified to push the boundaries of the field. Instead, these experts should be working with the communicators together. Okay, now going on to government's first contention on best for you. So on their first thing about how you're going to be more renowned, they say that the stuff written in obscure fields are not for the general public, and you can learn to be a good communicator, especially if you're already an academic. They cite some YouTube examples. So academic papers in obscure fields are not for the general public, sure, but neither are accessibility projects on obscure topics. Maybe a tiny bit more so, but let's be realistic. Do you think that so many people are deciding to watch documentaries on obscure Beatles over Game of Thrones? I think not. You think when you're on YouTube, you're going to find a channel that has 75 subscribers who has a podcast on like a random frog in like South America, and you're going to want to watch that instead of like Mr. Beast? I don't think that seems pretty logical. Second, on the point about more money, they say the average person is actually very interested in learning about these obscure fields. And then they say like these 10 other research papers that were written are not for the general public, and the general public does not understand them. So you're probably not going to be a great communicator. At the very least, you're probably not going to be as good as the people who have just dedicated their lives to animation. And Gov can bring up these examples of like 5 people who have made tons of money with YouTube channels or academic books, but that ignores the fact that 99.99% of these channels fail. And the difference is on our side of the house with these innovations, some of them are so much more successful because the difference is both of them are making a ton of money. But at the end of the day, with these YouTube channels that they cite, we might know them now, we might know them in 10 years, but I guarantee you in 300 years, no one will have heard of them. Whereas in 300 years, everyone will know who Albert Einstein is, and that is unique to our side of the house. Now they go on to talk about, in this contention on fulfillment, they say you haven't dedicated your life to research, you have dedicated your life to the field, and then talking to other people gives you fulfillment. So the average person doesn't really care about weird frogs or multivariable calculus. Let's just be realistic here. And you are a researcher. You have dedicated your life to research. We think it's unfair to say, like, you've dedicated your life to the field, but not research. What is this esoteric field if not research? We think that it is, like,
primarily just research. And talking to other people does give you fulfillment. But on our side of the house, you're probably still going to be publishing like these same papers, even if they're not like in the most accessible format. People are still going to be reading them if they are interested in going into the field, and they're probably going to know something about the subject, so they'll probably be able to understand it. Now going to Gov C2 on best for field, they say like the same response here. We're talking about average people. We're not talking about incredibly smart people who are deciding to go into the field, and that more people can easily interact with your material. So Gov cannot have it both ways. Either smart people are smart enough to learn how to communicate, animate, and write academic papers, or smart people sit around and watch movies and documentary features all day. I think that if somebody is smart enough to be a rocket scientist,
POI?
if I have time at the end, if somebody is smart enough to be a rocket scientist, then they probably know how to read, and they're probably smart enough and excited enough about their field to read an academic paper, even if it's a little bit more complicated. Even if on SciGov you spark the curiosity of average people, these people are never going to become rocket scientists simply because even if they can understand this somewhat accessible thing over time, when they actually delve into the field, it's going to get infinitely more confusing and then just be completely lost and probably switch fields. Now going on to opposition case. On responding to our first subpoint on innovation, they say that more people in the field is better than one person who researches. One, there's no guarantee that you're going to bring anyone new into the field, but you're definitely going to develop this field. If it's a brand new esoteric field, you're probably in your lifetime going to make at least one innovation. You're going to feel so much more fulfilled, and that's going to be like, or more innovation is probably going to bring more people to the workplace, instead of like a book that everyone can understand, but no one really like is interested in. On our point about inspiration, they say that most people have never interacted with the field you are involved in. If I have time at the end, I have a lot to get through. They say that most people have never interacted with the field you are involved in, so they're probably not going to be inspired, and you inspire people by bringing in interest. So you will not inspire people more than National Geographic. Even if National Geographic is discussing a different field, they have the world's top photographers, animators, writers, directors, etc. Are you really going to compete with these big conglomerates? No, people are going to go to them instead of you, and you're never going to be able to get your name really out. Whereas if you have some big discovery, over time, people will hear about it and learn about it. So basically what this is saying is that like innovation and focusing on your field is a prerequisite to accessibility, because over time, as people see your innovation and it's actually helping the real world, people are going to be more interested into the field, people are going to join, and then more accessible stuff will come out, but it needs to be a developed field in order for that to happen. Second contention on self-interest, they respond to a stable income by saying you're not abandoning your unemployment. So most of your income comes from research stipends. We don't agree with this. If you're not researching, you probably are abandoning your employment. I feel like that seems pretty logical and intuitive. Secondly, on more money from innovation, they say that if you make a great innovation, you're not going to make any money. So great innovations make billions. Carrico and Wiseman sold their research to Pfizer for hundreds of millions of dollars, more money than anyone has ever made from making things accessible. And Henry Ford did not make information about cars accessible. He just sold cars once people already had access to the information. This is completely untrue. And lastly, they say for legacy that people don't know about the people who invented something, but rather the people who popularized it. As for cars, I think everyone knows that Carl Benz invented cars. It wasn't Henry Ford.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Urge an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Yeah, right to me. All right, I will start my time now. Okay, so I'm going to go into three clashes first. The first is on the characterization and probability of either outcome. So the idea that your research is just automatically going to remain esoteric is almost certainly false. I mean, I'm not saying that your research is guaranteed to make you the next Einstein, but your research is also not guaranteed to make you like the single least important researcher of all time. Just because your research starts out obscure and esoteric does not whatsoever mean that it's going to end that way. You could certainly discover something super important. Now, are you going to inspire millions of people in Gov world? I can tell you probably not, almost certainly not. Nobody really cares about your like little frogs or number theory or quantum mechanics or whatever. And even for the people that do care, that tiny minority, they're one of two groups. They're either one, your academics and friends who already know about the field, so you're not inspiring them, or two, they're people that are super smart considering different fields, and they're probably going to be more susceptible to like the massive flashy National Geographic things or like Colormatics documentaries rather than like your obscure research, right? Someone who's super smart is going to be like, oh my God, it's so cool. I could work at NASA. I want to watch this documentary about sending a rocket to the moon, not like, oh, I want to dedicate my life to weird frogs. But whether you vote for Gov or Op, this house's life is probably going to be pretty unremarkable. 99% of the time, your YouTube channel is going to be unsuccessful and you're not going to conduct any important research. 99% of the time, your life is not going to be that high impact to your field. So we think you should probably just stick to the stable income, stick to working with your friends, being around your friends, and stick to doing what you love and what you've dedicated your life to, where at least you have some chance of advancing your field rather than adding almost nothing to the accessibility to it. Now, second class, what is the point of making it accessible to average people? Like, let's say that everything Gov has said is right, and you are going to inspire tons and tons of people to watch movies about your obscure field. I think that future rocket scientists already know that they're smart, and they already know that they want to be academics. They're probably reading at least a few academic papers in whichever fields they're considering before going into those fields. And at the very least, your one like simplified documentary is not going to push the needle in either direction. I think that at very best in Gov world, you're going to be inspiring people to watch movies like some random dude watching Netflix, and that guy is not going to end up becoming a rocket scientist or becoming like a frog researcher or whatever. More likely than not, they'll watch it for one night, be like, oh, that's cool, and then move on with their life. But even if they do decide that they want to like dedicate their lives to it, the people that already know they want to dedicate their lives to it already know they want to dedicate their lives to it and are already smart enough to know that. At best, you're inspiring people who are not going to make much of a difference in the field. Now, the only area that I think Gov really has left to win on is fulfillment, probably the only place you can still vote Gov. But I think that there's no guarantee that you're actually ever going to bring people into the field, which means there's no guarantee that you'll be fulfilled. Plus, if you do bring people into the field, how are you ever going to know that you're bringing them into the field? Probably won't be fulfilled from that either. Alternatively, you're probably more fulfilled innovating something, or at least doing what you love. You're going to be way more fulfilled if you have some great innovation in the field you love, rather than leaving your job and making less money with the almost impossible feat of getting people to join your niche field on frogs. Now, two areas where I think you can independently vote for Op. The first is on self-interest. More likely than not, as I said before, your life's going to be pretty unremarkable. If you run a YouTube channel with 100 subscribers, you're not going to make a single cent. Whereas if you're doing research, you're at least collecting research stipends, regardless of how much money that actually amounts to. Maybe it's not like millions and millions, but it's better than the nothing you get from your YouTube channel. And if you do innovate something, you have the potential to make way, way, way more than by making things accessible. Like you're going to make tons of money by selling your research. And look at like Carico and Weissman selling their research for a ton of money. You're going to have a massive legacy that endures for generations. And of course, even if you don't, you'll still have the stable income and research stipends versus taking a major, major risk. But then the second thing is that innovation is probably prerequisite to accessibility. So even if you do want to make the world more accessible, even if that's what you want to dedicate your life to, the best way for you to do that is by sticking to research. The best way for you to bring more people into the field is by making the field bigger, making the field something so awesome that these super smart people want to go into that over something that seems more enticing. And that's how you're actually going to make a difference. Plus, you're probably not a great animator. You're probably not a great communicator. What we know is that you're a great researcher. So why not leave the research to the researchers, leave the animation and the communication to the communicators and the animators?
Your time is up, please. Thank you.
Judges, are you ready? My time begins now. I have good news for you, judges. There's one important point from side Gov that is instantly winning for Gov in the round. And I'm going to explain why that point is the most important and why it is the easiest place to vote for side Gov in the round. The point is really simple, that on side Gov, you are bringing other people into the field that you love. Firstly, why this is true. Secondly, why this is the most important point in the round. My opponents say to why you won't bring other people into the round that nobody will find what you do and you won't be a communicator. But I have to ask throughout the round, where is the warranting? I'm about to go through the round here, and there's no responses to most of what Austin says. Firstly, that like my opponents say that the average person won't find this. We would say that no, the average person is interested, but regardless is Austin's analysis that this only requires like university students to find it, and only you don't need that many smart people to join into the field. You just need enough smart people to actually read this. Secondly, my opponents say that any given university student will already know everything and be smart enough to learn about it, even if it isn't written to be accessible to the lay public. But university students don't know everything. They don't already have a PhD. They're clearly interested. They're clearly smart. They want to read things. But most academic publishing isn't, as Alex says, a little dense. It's written for other people with actual PhDs who've been studying this field for years. Innovation is not a prerequisite to accessibility because what is written by people with PhDs is so unbelievably dense that nobody can get into it. Even if you think the thing is cool, if when you try to get into it, it gets blocked out because nothing is accessible to you, you will never try and join. Nobody joins if there's a huge wall in front of them. Thirdly, my opponents say that you'll be outcompeted by National Geographic, but they don't respond to Austin when Austin says that National Geographic just doesn't go into random obscure fields that's just not realistic, and they never respond to my analysis from the very first speech that you're likely to be the very first person or one of the very first people to be doing this because most academics are incentivized to write for other academics rather than a lay audience. Fifth, my opponents say that you're going to be a bad communicator. But once again, they just drop what Austin tells you, that you're a smart academic, you're literally a teacher, you're going to learn you're already a good communicator, you can learn how to like use YouTube, you're going to be able to be successful at this. At that point, on SideGov, you're bringing people into the field you love. Why is it that on every other thing that means that you win? Firstly, why does this make people the most known? My opponents say that like maybe you'll become a household name if you do this. But firstly, that's not your advocacy on Side Up. The literal motion says that your research will remain obscure. The whole point of this motion is that if it's a trade-off, Side Up can't argue their own side, so they picked a different side to argue instead. But even regardless, look at the fact that what Austin tells you, that when people innovate, you don't remember them. Remember Pascal's triangle from like math class when you were younger? Pascal didn't invent that. Mohammed ibn Isayan invented that, and then Pascal was like, "Oh, I have a cool idea. Let's write about this for everybody else." But finally, the fact is that we were okay. Then secondly here is on what makes you the most money, because you're going to be the most known because it's not your advocacy, and the people who popularize things are remembered better. Yeah, Carl Benz invented the car, but Henry Ford is way more known. But next, on why this makes you the most money. Here's the thing. Universities pay you for both publishing and research. Saying that universities pay for research stipends ignores the fact that universities pay you for writing books and publishing them, and also pay you for just teaching. This idea that you're just going to lose your job if you don't try to innovate is ridiculous. But even if you buy them, literally not arguing the motion here that you're going to be like losing your job, innovation is way more high risk. The chance that you like stake your job on something that's like trying to innovate and then you fail or your innovation doesn't matter is really, really high. Whereas if you publish things, you're likely to at least get some amount of attention. You're likely to make some amount of more money. They say Henry Ford just sold cars, but that's the whole point. He didn't invent them, but he sold them and he made a hell of a lot of money doing it. Next, why does this give you the most fulfillment? I think that there's analysis from my first speech that just goes entirely dropped here, which is the fact that innovation is just like actually horrible to do and feels terrible. It's isolating. You're burning the midnight oil at like 1 a.m. by yourself in a lab trying to get something you've been trying to get to work for years that's never worked yet. They literally never respond to the fact that innovation is really, really isolating and really, really miserable, where comparatively, you love this field. Getting other people excited about this field is great. You don't dedicate yourself to research. You dedicated yourself to the field. Getting other people to join the field too will make you happy. And finally, why does this help the field the most? The point that they say is that we help future rocket scientists. But the point on SideGov is that people aren't future rocket scientists until they read something that makes them want to be a rocket scientist in the future. SideGov, if you already desperately want to be a rocket scientist, we don't help you. But most people don't want to desperately be something in an obscure field, moving into my grace. The point is most people people are just people, or just really smart people. You don't become a future rocket scientist until you read something that makes you want to become a future rocket scientist. And until that point happens, you don't have a PhD. You can't read those academic things. And once you have smart people joining the field, you actually help the field itself. You can't have a field built off of magically creating future rocket scientists. You have to convince regular smart people to want to be future rocket scientists. That's the only way the field itself persists into the future. Thus, I urge a government ballot.
Thank you very much, guys.
That was a great round. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess the judges will go probably 5-10 minutes until we get everybody's tab in.
Question, should we go to a different room?
We actually, you just do it. Oh, you just do it on your own, and you
perfect.
put it
I'm
into
posted
tab,
there.
and whoever the third person is, it'll tell you you're the last one, and then we'll know that it'll show how we voted.
Perfect. Perfect.